potential.
Thank you for attending our session this afternoon.
Like we're launched into space. Yeah.
Great to hear this very topic
This afternoon, workplace diversity is more than just.
We definitely want to hear from you, so please use the chat feature for questions. I'm so honored to be facilitating the session this afternoon at the first Worldwide Staffing Summit with such an impressive panel of staffing and MSP professionals and colleagues. I'll go ahead and get us started with some brief introductions. My name is Mary Kristenik. I am the Senior Vice President of Enterprise Accounts at Acquia. Acquia is a global staffing and managed service company headquartered in Santa Clara, California. Sonu? Would you like to do a brief introduction? Oh, we can't hear you. Maybe Steve?
Yeah.
There you go.
Okay, I was hearing a bit of echo, so hopefully that's gone. Great to be here.
Would you like to do a brief introduction?
Great to be here. I'm Sonu Ratra, co-founder of Acquia. It's an award-winning technology staffing company. This is our 20th year in business, and I'm also the founder of Women Back to Work, a program that is an initiative of Acquia and has become a movement.
Co-founder of Acquia. It's an award-winning technology staffing company.
Yeah, we've got quite a bit of echo. Steve, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I'll give it a pause in case there's more echo. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Steve Dern. As you know, I'm the minority on this call, being the 52-year-old white guy from Cincinnati talking about diversity and inclusion. It's actually a topic I'm very passionate about, dating back to my early days when I was hired into corporate human resources, and realizing that it takes a lot of different mindsets and perspectives to drive success. So very pleased to be on the panel. My current role is as Executive Vice President of Talent Solutions for Evaluant, which is a solutions provider. We provide MSP, payrolling and IC compliance, and direct sourcing, as well as consulting services.
Mary.
Hi, everyone. I hope that you can all hear me and it does not echo. So I'm going to go ahead and mute my line just as soon as I'm done. But very honored to be here. Thank you, Mary, Emily, Steve, and Sanyu. I really appreciate spending the time with you and everyone who's watching. My name is Mary Martin. I'm the Global Vice President of Strategic Solutions for Pinnacle Group. The majority of my career has been in the staffing space. I actually started about 15 years ago as a receptionist at Tech Systems. So I've worked my way throughout all different areas in the industry. And my focus right now is really on consulting solutions within the MSP space, strategic solutions within statement of work or services procurement management. And I'm super excited about this topic. This has definitely been something that Pinnacle has spent a lot of time and energy focused on within our own supplier diversity ecosystem, lifting up our suppliers that are supporting us on the MSP accounts, but now transitioning more to workplace diversity and how we can really ensure that candidates that are coming through are treated in an equal and healthy manner. And so we're really excited to get this started.
Thanks, Mary. Last but not least, Emily.
Yeah, thank you. And I'd like to echo, I'm thrilled to be here, and it's so nice to see and join familiar faces on the panel. Gives me the feeling of kind of somewhat being in a conference and networking for real, having the familiar faces in front of me. So thank you. But Emily Costello, Senior Vice President of Channel Relationships at Robert Half. I've been with Robert Half almost 24 years. I've had a dynamic career, but has spent the last decade plus focused on our MSP and VMS and other third-party partnerships. I'm also a mom of 3 boys from very diverse backgrounds. So not only does this topic speak to me professionally, but diversity and inclusion is also a topic that speaks to me personally as well. So thank you for having me.
Thanks, Emily. Why don't we go ahead and get started? Diversity is about the unconscious bias, right? It's accepting difference, realizing your point of view is not the only point of view, and knowing we all come in really different shapes and sizes. We're more comfortable with safe, like-minded people, which that's human instinct. It's about not having a fixed mindset about who can and can't perform on the job. It's making a systemic change in the way people hire. It's about going into the process with a clean slate, no judgments, no misperceptions about this candidate may not work out. How do we, as staffing professionals, hiring talent every day, make the conscious decisions to unlock the potential? Sonu, how would you advocate for diversity, equity, and inclusion with hiring managers who really don't understand its importance?
Yeah, very good question, Mary. And, I'm reminded of this Pixar animated video that many of you may have seen. And it's about this pink ball of yarn that it's her first day at work. And she, walks in, from the elevator, and she sees people that are very different from her. There's no female there. And then she tries to fit in. And while she's trying to fit in, she loses her own identity. And what the company and the other members of the team lose in return is that creativity or the innovation she may bring. So, when I looked at the video, to me, it amplifies something much deeper, right? And that you can embrace and you can establish diversity, you can hire the right person, but unless you have inclusion, you're not going to make any headway. So I think the first step is for people to really get people to really stop and think about this. And that essentially is that unconscious bias, right? And there's multiple things we could do, show them data, have them look at their teams. Is it diverse or not? Do you end up hiring your own kind? Are you really looking at a diverse slate of candidates? And then from there, a systemic unconscious bias training that sort of myths that you bust the myths that they may have and the preconceived notions. And of course, and then it is really creating the right culture, creating the right company policies, which is, the right ERGs and, a good place for working mothers. Emily mentioned that, right? As a mom, there's a balance you try to create. So really creating that environment. And then, of course, a lot of outreach from, hiring from the recruiting teams that are working with them. So there's a myriad of things that we could do, but it really starts with not just diversity but also inclusion.
Great. Steve, how would you advocate? Oh, you're on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. I think that when you're trying to get buy-off from the hiring community, a lot of that, just as it is with many other topics, it really starts from the top down, from executive leadership. So as an MSP provider or payrolling or staffing supplier, whatever role we're playing, making sure that executive leadership is bought off on the importance of diversity and inclusion, and that it not only is part of the initiatives for the company, but it becomes part of the culture of the company as much as you can try to drive that mindset. I think it needs to be something that ultimately there's a common theme around it at corporate events, communications, marketing strategies, project initiatives that are going on. Because if that's not there, my 20 years in this business has told me it's difficult to get that buy-off from the larger population that is under that ship. Beyond that, I think we're driven by numbers many times. And numbers tell a very important story. If there's statistical evidence, case studies from credible sources that talk about the successes of diverse candidates and how they make an impact on the workforce, continuing to reinforce those concepts, that helps it become just ingrained and it becomes an everyday thought process for those managers.
Yeah, no, agreed. Emily, do you want to weigh in?
Yeah, sure, Mary. I think personally, we're lucky at Robert Half that our company values are rooted in what our founder stood for and valued. Bob Half, for those of you who don't know, Robert Half, was our founder, and he spoke out against discriminatory practices in our industry in the 60s. So it's kind of rooted in our DNA. So I'm really lucky in that point that, I jumped right into an organization that had it at its foundation. But when advocating for diversity outside of my organization, I think it's important to know that it's not just the right thing to do for business, but it's also healthy for business. I think Deloitte put out a study a few years ago that said inclusion and diversity cultures are 2 times more likely to hit their financial targets, 3 times more likely to be high performing, 6 times more likely to be innovative and agile. So there's a lot of business cases and data around diversity and inclusion that I think we can educate our clients on and our customers to help them understand, the positives beyond just doing the right thing. And Steve, I think, spoke to it. The tone definitely starts at the top. I think just simply starting the conversation. We all have access to individuals within organizations that are have influence within their organization, and really just engaging on the topic of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And as you get them engaged and they want to learn more, then, do what we do best in our industry, which is connect them with other companies or maybe further along in the path in their initiatives, and, get the ball rolling.
Yeah. How do you, kind of along that same level with clients, hiring manager community, how do you kind of educate about removing their unconscious bias?
Mary, so I'll give you an example. Our Women Back to Work program that creates systemic pathways to facilitate the re-entry of women back into the workforce. And there's a lot of biases that exist around just that hiring, because resumes get rejected because they have gaps on their resume. They may not be upskilled. They may not have the best and the top Java skill that they're looking for. And I think the first step, of course, is to help them agree that, okay, well, we're committed to hiring this talent pool because it is an underutilized talent pool. But then how do you educate them? And it is walking them through step by step as to what are the myths, right? What are the preconceived notions? And we've noticed that every hiring manager has deliverables that have to be met. The projects that are, underway, and you've got all these results that you need to stay focused on. So being able to help them realize that wherever they're going, this diverse pool of talent can actually help them get there. And then, of course, nothing succeeds like success. And the part of that education is, of course, the hiring managers that do take the plunge, they have to, the returner talent pool or the people they hire, they do have to perform with some amount of coaching and some amount of mentoring. But I think when they see that happen, it helps them change the mindset. And again, I think Steve said it and Emily said it is about changing those mindsets.
I wanted to just really quickly jump in, Mary and Sanu. I think that makes a lot of sense. Steve, you kind of started the conversation of having the top-down approach. And I know that Staffing Industry Analysts released an article and report in November of last year that talked about diversity in the workplace. And the 3 areas or the barriers to that, the first barrier was executive buy-in. The other aspects had to do with not having enough data and maybe co-employment concerns, but getting that executive buy-in is super challenging. So for staffing vendors, the attention and the partnership that you have with your MSP or directly with your client or directly with your talent acquisition managers, make sure that you are educating them similarly to how Sanu, referenced that. We are the experts. We understand what's happening in our industry. And at times, if there's a category buyer or individuals on the procurement side that have multitude of categories, it might not be top of mind. But if it's part of their values report or if it's part of some community initiative, they understand that it's important, but it might not be something that they have to deal with day to day. So I would just recommend making sure that those conversations are being had often, and that it's a part of the scorecard review and it's a part of those quarterly business reviews and the one-on-one conversations, because sometimes that executive buy-in is lacking.
Yeah, agreed. Emily, anything else?
Yeah, I was going to say that I think one step that we've seen companies take is to remove, just tactical, removing candidates' addresses, education, things that come up like that in the resumes when searching on their AI platforms. And the other, I think, tip to controlling unconscious biases is just being familiar with what the common biases are, right? Things that show up in the workplace, like affinity bias or confirmation bias, and understanding really what those are and how they affect your decision-making process can really help tremendously towards your journey to, being aware of personal biases and removing those.
Yeah, absolutely. Mary, in your experience, what are the challenges faced by members of historically underrepresented groups in the workplace?
Well, one of the things that we're really focused on at Pinnacle is giving back to the community in which we live and serve. So my father, from a personal perspective, was a Milwaukee public school teacher for 47 years. I sit on the board of a nonprofit that helps underserved youth. And we really give back in a meaningful way tied to career coaching and employability skills, because being able to, get that job, get that position when there might not be active opportunities outside your door is super important. So, really taking an active look at other companies that have those same values, other partners or staffing firms that have those values as well, and just creating a little mini ecosystem, I think, is super important. I did read an article the other day that one of the social platforms out there did settle a lawsuit because, for instance, on a job requirement, they requested that the person complete university within around 2007 or 2008. Well, that's a gender bias, and you have to be careful with that. But then also looking at that globally, we talked about, obviously in the US, we have different rules and guidelines, different laws in California and things like that. But in other countries like Mexico, for instance, they may put on their job description that they're looking for a specific gender. And although those things might not be known, to that category manager that oversees that, he's probably run into it. Just giving more insight and visibility into that, I think, is super important when you're looking at global diversity as opposed to just in the US.
Yeah, excellent points. Sonu, what do you think are some of the challenges? Hope you're on mute.
Make sure. Well, for the historically underrepresented and the marginalized communities, we don't, many times when recruiters are really looking at the resume, they don't see those jobs that they perform because those opportunities have never come up for them. So I think that's, and Mary said that you have to recognize that hasn't come up for them. They haven't been given those opportunities. So therefore, it's providing that platform for the historically underrepresented communities to have that first opportunity, so they can then you can actually see them appear on their resumes. And then also, I think creating job postings that encourage a wider audience to apply. And as you know, women will apply for a job if it's only 100% match, but men will apply for a job if it's 60% match. And I think that's also applicable to the marginalized communities as well. And those are things that we really need to change urgently.
Yep, agreed. Emily, what are maybe some of the strategies that you've used or Robert Half has used to address some of these challenges? And maybe how successful were some of those strategies?
Yep. I think that what we've done is we've put tangible action around our recruiting processes. We've, made sure that we've included different types of organizations. And at Robert Half specifically, we have many organizations that support Black communities, National Association of Black Accountants, United Negro College Fund, Minority Corporate Counsel Association, several more. We've also expanded our partnership with Ascend, and we have a nonprofit in the Pan Asian Organization for Business Professionals. And we've gotten involved in Boys and Girls Club and Dress for Success and Junior Achievement. And, the list goes on. But I think it's really putting action behind our recruiting and really getting involved in those organizations so that we can, create opportunities for people of all backgrounds to connect where maybe with others where they maybe wouldn't have just naturally before. So it's, I think that's, as a staffing organization, I think we really have, an obligation to really, reach out at a grassroots effort and get involved in our local communities and as well as, global communities as well.
Yeah. Steve, we haven't forgotten you, Steve, by the way. What are the hurdles to a holistic D&I approach with the contingent workforce, and like what is the right strategy?
Well, I think that from a hurdle perspective, one of the biggest things that's out there, and it's sort of a double-edged sword in our industry, but if you think about legal risk, companies are fearful to seek out certain workers that may help diversify the workforce. But many companies ask about demographics of the workforce, but how much do they do with the information? Because I think there's still a lot of concern around, wanting to get diversity credit for working with diversity agencies, but they're not really doing anything around tracking those demographics because of legal risk for discrimination and things like that. So, I don't want to make this a political conversation by any means relative to the U.S. side of things. But I think overall, we've got to find a way to elevate the conversation in a way that it goes beyond, well, am I getting tier 1 diversity credits for working with a diversity certified firm? I'm not saying there's anything wrong in working with those firms, but we've got, issues where there's a war for talent, for quality talent. There's a lot of resources that are available. It is a more transient workforce, so the opportunity to get good talent and attract them in can be there. And I think if we can, and it's above my pay grade in a way, but if we can work with the legal elements, the political elements involved to where it's safer to gather that information and safer to take proactive steps on engaging a more diverse workforce, I think companies are going to be better off. You mentioned right at the top, Mary, it makes sense. It makes business sense to have diversity in our business teams that we're working with. And, I'll just share a quick pop culture reference on this. So NBC has a show called Superstore. And, virtually, if you've watched it before, wave your hand, not that I can see it. But weeks ago, they did an episode that actually talked about diversity in the workforce. And the person who was kind of leading the effort in the store was the African-American guy who is disabled, who serves in the customer service desk role and makes all the PA announcements, et cetera. And they're doing an internal store meeting. And one of the managers says, well, I've always been colorblind. I don't care what color someone is or what their background is. And the guy responded, he said, but that's just the thing. And I've been guilty of it too growing up. But that's just the thing. It's almost politically that we don't want to recognize there are cultural differences. There are challenges that a woman faces versus a man, that Native American faces versus maybe African American versus international workers versus LGBTQ. All of those experiences can provide a different perspective when we're working in a team-based organization. And if you embrace those differences, if you recognize and learn from them, that can create further opportunity, further synergy in terms of how people will work together, and maybe even new revenue opportunities for you to grow your business. And we've got to find a way to get to that point.
So it's point, Steve. With that too, I wanted to say that I've seen a lot of different staffing vendors create mentorship opportunities within their four walls, and I think that that lends itself to what you were saying. Maybe pairing up with someone that you might not have been in a position to pair up with. I think of the people in my life that I'm around very often, and I'm the only girl. There's so many boys around me, so my experience is going to be different from someone else's. Emily, you mentioned that you got a bunch of boys at home too. And so there are different ways that we can leverage that mentorship and create opportunities in-house to ensure that that's a healthy working environment, that everyone has a voice and their voice is heard and respected. And I think that that can be done in a really simple way, just by creating community and creating a sense of community and openness. And staffing companies can do that, tomorrow. It's not something challenging to set up.
Yeah. So kind of lending to, Steve, what you were saying earlier about the data, right? Like, where does the staffing, like we as their staffing partners and MSP professionals kind of come into the picture to ensure it's more than just numbers? Mary, do you have some thoughts on that?
I actually do. I mean, I know that a lot of the VMS technologies have come out with really amazing feature sets that allow for that collection. Steve alluded to the co-employment risk and how that's changed over the years, and that shouldn't necessarily be a barrier. So if you're partnered with technology that allows that to be captured and then sliced, your MSP partners have to provide that information back to you. They're providing it back to their stakeholders. And then internally at the staffing level, I know Emily mentioned at RHI, they do, tracking in that way, but the VMS providers have really stepped up. They've created feature sets that allow for that. And it shouldn't just be, blanket approach of candidate numbers. It should be a ratio tied to how many of those candidates actually ended up filling the jobs. At what time were they submitted? Are they on, benches and ready to go? Or does it take maybe 9 or 10 days to identify them? Does that make their supplier less worthy of getting that placement? No, we shouldn't, criticize them for taking longer. Maybe they're doing that deliberately. So having those, again, open discussions based off of data, and now having our VMS partners available and providing features and functionality is really exciting. I know we recently saw some new functionality from Beeline and some others, and I was really excited to be able to maybe bring that into customers in a more frequent way.
And Mary, if I can piggyback on your thought there, it's not just about getting that statistic in front of program sponsors. It's got to go out more and more within the organization, within the entire ecosystem. And then, it's one thing to have the information, but then people have to act on it, whether it is initiatives, whether it's projects, even comp plans, maybe. If you're an organization and you want to try to drive activity, what better way is there than to have that maybe as a component of comp plan structures and things like that?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and see, add scorecards to it, right? I mean, MSP scorecards should at some point include what are the numbers looking like, because I think staffing companies like ours should be, responsible to provide that on a quarterly basis and, monitor it some level.
Totally agree. So how do we, as their MSP staffing provider, offer a solution? What's our responsibility?
Well, yeah, Steve, go ahead.
So my thought is, first of all, as an MSP, we need to make sure we're walking the walk that we're talking. It's got to be part of our culture. We've got to be able to demonstrate that to the clients that we are calling on. We need to be engaging suppliers and workers of all type, establishing goals with clients right up front, part of the discovery process. If I ever get an RFP that doesn't speak to diversity and inclusion and what those goals are going to be, that's one of the first questions I put back to them to see what their stance is on that. I think that, with Avaya, we've always prided ourselves on being a company that executes well for our clients, but it's also a matter of educating them. Thought leadership has to be a cornerstone for what we're doing. That's not going to stop. But again, I encourage all of us in the ecosystem to challenge our clients. Don't be afraid to push back on them, but at the same time, educate them in a way that they recognize where those benefits are going to reap for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Shona, anything else that you'd like to offer before we wrap up? I know we've got a little less than 2 minutes left.
Yeah, no, Steve is spot on what he said, but I also think that, today where we are historically, I think diversity, equity, and inclusion is not simply a responsibility that a head of diversity is responsible for, or HR. I think it's a responsibility for every single one of us, right? Whether you're staffing, MSP, or, I always go to companies that we work with and look at what was, has a CEO taken a pledge for diversity. And for many years, we've been talking about aligning ourselves with the, goals of the company. And I think it's time to align yourself with diversity goals and really make those changes, and then really create, a pipeline, right? So the more the number of candidates you submit, it's a simple formula in my mind. Diverse candidates you submit, the more that get interviewed, the more they're going to get hired. And that's how you start to see impact.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Just any closing thoughts? I do have a great question that popped in amongst a lot of great comments. I know.
I was just going to offer one thing too. I think having a diverse population is great, but companies have to retain and engage that population. And I think one thing is, making D&I updates part of their onboarding process, and then giving the contingent workers access to the D&I resources too are really important. So I just, I think it's one thing to look at the data, watch the data, know the diverse population's there, but what are you going to do with that population is what really matters. And then I would also say that, I think just, at this moment, listening to one another, openly and with empathy to create better understanding, and then to use that knowledge, right, to chart our path forward is really important. So, and I think this session is, really good stuff in the right direction.
Absolutely. Guys, thank you. Thank you so much for all the valuable insights. I do want to take a quick question. Brian, and I'm sorry, Brian, if I'm mispronouncing your last name, Brian Buells. Great discussion. What are the panelists' views of corporate employers expecting their staffing suppliers of contingent workers as a primary source for diverse talent that could become employees later, compared with the strategy of hiring diverse talent directly as employees? Does anybody have any thoughts on that?
It's a really good question. And I think that it kind of lends itself to the total talent ecosystem that was talked about earlier, that contingent labor and gig workers can be an entryway to that W-2, to that talent, to that organization, and that brand awareness is really important. So how the MSP, how the consultative side sort of matches with the talent acquisition strategy is really, really important. So we've seen it in both ways. One of our main customers, they're using it sort of as a try before you buy model, where you can bring in contingent labor and then hopefully bring them on as a W-2 employee at a later date. And if that is a strategy of a company, then having this in place up front is really, really important. So again, it's understanding the business, arrangement and how that company or that client uses talent and what their strategy is for the future. And it kind of goes to what Sanyu said earlier around, and Emily, around retaining talent and making sure that if they come in, that they don't leave. And so I think that that is a huge piece of this, is you can do all of this upfront work, but what are you doing to ensure that they're happy, they're motivated, they're able to organically grow, they're given mentorship opportunities, they feel valued, all those good things. So we are seeing it on the MSP side, where they're trying to leverage that for their internal workforce as well.
Excellent. Any other comments?
Yeah, I think that the scenarios where you've got a, shall we say, try before you buy model for that, my experience, it's mainly been focused on certain roles in an organization, A lot of times it's commercial staffing or call center administrative types of things where there's a try before you buy strategy, if you will, that has been done with that. If the person makes it through that regular training class, which maybe lasts 6 months, 9 months, whatever, then the organization, the client organization, is going to want to convert them over long term, provide them the long term career path on that. I think that what would be interesting statistically, and I don't know how much it has been tracked consistently over the years, is what is the hit rate on those conversions? How does that tie to demographics, et cetera?
Great. One question, Stephen, this might be punted your way. It's kind of more of a Monty question, but from Todd Lawhorn, what about the legal challenges of asking the questions? Race, gender, et cetera. It's a great question.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what I was talking about earlier in that, I think there's been progress made in terms of us being able to ask for demographic information on a volunteer basis only. I think that, you're still going to have a gap there in terms of how to be able to gather. But for what you can gather, let's get that reportable. Let's get it shared with our client communities and even our supply base. There's still the risks out there in many clients' minds around the discrimination element overall. Hopefully as time goes on, as we've got different workforce environments, we're able to balance that out, because there's still tactical challenges that exist. If you think about, transportation to a work site, sometimes that's an issue for a lot of workers. Where the work has to be performed, that can discriminate out a certain demographic as well. So,
terrific. Well, I think we are right at time. So first and foremost, thank you, Sonu, Emily, Mary, and Steve, for your inspiring thoughts on diversity and how together we can offer a solution. And a big thank you for everyone that joined, as an attendee, and all the great questions. So thank you for that. And be sure to join Tim, Jeff, and Dave for the last panel of the day. It has never been easier to expand your staffing recruitment business globally. Enjoy the rest of the Worldwide Staffing Summit, everyone. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you, Mary.
thank you.
Thank you.